All right, so we're going to get kicked off for Egypt. Do you want to get started just explaining what the history machine is?
So our aim in this is to go through the various commanders and generals in history and try and figure out if they're underrated or overrated based on numbers that our computer spits out. So the history machine is a neural network we have created based on a database of battles going back from 2500 BC through to just before, really, it changes from BC to...
It pretty much ends with the fall of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, which conveniently is right around the time 0 AD. Pretty much anything before the birth of Christ. But to get started, first thing I'm going to say, because today's subject is Egypt is just so old. Now, you might think like, okay, it's old. It's a couple of centuries. It's a couple of ever. It's like, no. You have no idea just how old this place is. Like, it starts off with, imagine some kind of very prehistory humans messing around in Africa, working their way northward. One of the first big cities they hit is Egypt. They hit the Nile. This whole thing predates agriculture, and they settle there. And like, that is the starting point. And by the time you hit, let's say, 3200 BC, you've got a dynasty. That's 5,000 years ago. And that's when they had the first dynasty. So to put in perspective, that the first dynasty around 3200 BC, the second one 2900 BC, and it's in the third dynasty, which they refer to as the Old Kingdom, that you start building pyramids.
I regularly get annoyed when watching things or reading things like Song of Ice and Fire or Lord of the Rings, and they always give these stupidly long time scales for dynasties. I'm like, it's not realistic that you'd have this one kind of culture continue on for thousands of years like this. Egypt is the real life exception.
Yeah, Egypt is the exception that proves the rule. Like, they're just there. Like, I'll pick a number. Like, the 9th dynasty lands in 2160 BC. The 7th dynasty is actually so shrouded in mystery, most people think it's fictitious. And to put in perspective, the Persians, who we'll be covering later, they hit and they become the 27th dynasty in 525 BC.
People think of Egypt, they think, like Cleopatra or whatever. Yeah. That was Ptolemaic dynasty. That was right at the end of the Egypt we think of. Cleopatra is closer to us than she was to the first dynasty by
I know,
a
it's
very
insane.
Long stretch.
It's insane. Because they take over and they are the 32nd dynasty. No, not even that. They're the 33rd. My God, it just doesn't end.
I mean, conquered multiple times, but it always just seemed to revert back to the same kind of steady... They kind of got assimilated partially into the culture.
The big thing about what makes this place like so consistent is the flooding of the Nile. Now, unfortunately, it's only in the last 100 years it has not flooded since an environmental dam was built. And that killed the whole thing. And at the same time, the outer limits of the place, like the outer boundaries, is a desert, so it's really hard to attack them.
Yeah. Even though it's maybe less so today than it was back then, even look on a map right now, a satellite map, and you will just see yellow, brown, just desert, and then just this green strip.
And that's it.
That's
yeah,
the
it's
Nile.
That's it. That's the Nile River. The longest river in the world, cutting down just through Africa. That is it. That is the lifeblood of the whole place. It's what made it entirely good. So I suppose the big thing we got to talk about Egypt is it's gone on forever, but we do not have much information for them. And I don't mean that in the sense of like we don't know much about this dynasty or this dynasty, but when it comes to our database and we're looking at like really persistent and consistent numbers and figures that we can plug in to the neural network and get us some results, we don't have that much. And it's really hindered the whole thing. However, what we do have is much later, and we do have a very particular special case who seems to stand out. He is referred to as, really, I'm going to say he's known as two names, and it'd be Ramses II or Ozymandias. And actually, I have kind of a cool little list of names from here. So it's Ramses II the Great, keeper of harmony and balance, strong and right, elective Ra, Ozymandias, and the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. That is some total Song of Ice and Fire shit there, right there. Like,
I mean, he stands out because, as you say, like, it's incredibly old. We have very little. What we do have is nearly all Ptolemaic Egypt and maybe a little bit of Persian Egypt in our database. Those things that we have maybe some solid numbers on.
And that's just because that data is new. That's it. It's like, it's the tail end.
It's the stuff where you had historians, you had stuff. I mean, it was probably embellished because propaganda has existed.
Yeah, the usual.
As long as writing has.
Well, it's existed forever. Yeah, as long as writing's been there, people have been exaggerating.
Yet you have this guy who's hanging around in the 1200s BC. I suppose he famously appears in the poem Ozymandias, which...
For our listeners who don't know this, I think this is probably my favourite poem, because I heard it and I was like, this is amazing. Yeah. So it was written by Percy Shelley, who was married to Mary Shelley, and she's famed as being the mother of sci-fi and the author of Frankenstein.
On an aside, I love that. I feel very progressive now that we've just listed like a male writer and said, oh, you know him because he's married to this one.
Yeah, he's married to her and she's way better than him.
I feel happy about this reversal.
Yeah. So to kick off, if you're not actually familiar with the poem Ozymandias, I'm going to read it out quickly. And it'll sum up, I think, the entire... It sums up perfectly the kind of the data and the information we have for Ramses II. And it's, I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survived stamped on those lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away. So there we go. That pretty much sums up this guy, that there's nothing left. There's wreckage. There's just sand or whatever, but he's there. Now, his works are kind of forgotten, but you will actually find it, funnily enough, hard-pressed to find an Egyptian building built that does not have his name carved somewhere in it before or after his birth. Just because they're like, stick his name on it. There we go. Ramses II. Bang. Seal of approval. It's like a quality mark.
I think our database anyway, and why that poem is kind of relevant. The poem about basically how you can be the biggest deal, time will still have forgotten you. But, the point is, even though obviously very little remains of what was obviously a very big deal, we still have a little bit of it, which is more than can be said for most everything else. And, we have very, very big gaps for this time period in our database, but we still have a couple of his battles appearing. And
Definitely.
The ones that are there, based on the computer's interpretation of it, on the neural network's interpretation, it was very impressive. I think both of them, he was given basically a 20% chance to win, and both of them he won fairly handily.
Now, I'm just going to pull this out here. Like, normally if we say, like, if you have a 50-50 chance, that's the flip of a coin, that's like the best commander wins. But if we're looking at 20%, like, it's not, I'm not even going to say it's not even 1 in 5, but that's just going to be outrageously difficult.
Yeah.
Would I be correct in that assumption?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think actually, if you looked through most of our data, I think most of what the history machine has interpreted battles as, I think you look at the very top generals, you look at ones like Alexander, the ones like Caesar, something that stands out about them, it's not that they win against massive odds, it's that they never take battles with massive odds. They are normally given the 80% chance to win, whereas Ramses is going through, in his couple of battles, with the opposite. He's on the 20% side.
Wow. And he still pulls it out of there like,
yeah.
That's outrageous. So you can just do that. But he is a very strange figure if you look up anything about him. The first thing is, he lived to be very old.
66-year reign, according to some sources.
Jesus Christ, yeah. I think it was nearly 96 when he died. And he possibly died of like a heart attack or a tooth infection. They're not really sure. But like he was around. Also, when he died, here's a little fun fact. There was no one in Egypt who was not born during his reign.
Oh, wow, that's...
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that no one beyond him would get maybe the care required to live that long. But wow, that's actually
it's pretty insane. He had up to 200 wives and or concubines, and he outlived a lot of his children.
He perfectly, again, summing up Egypt in that just like being there forever, just not going away, outliving everything else.
Yeah, very true. Actually, his very lifestyle just represents the entire archetype of Egypt. Like, I'm just going to be around here forever, for the longest time, doing my stuff. That's what I do. His big deal, though, is he wasn't just a very good commander. He was also a fantastic politician, leader, builder as well. Builder beyond belief. Like even the poem that we referenced earlier, it's just, all you can see is that he built temple after temple after temple after building after everything. It's just, he was also, this is going to be a cool little fact, he was married to Nefertiti, if you know that name. She is, funnily enough, considered by a lot of people to be the standard for beauty. And if you do look at the Nefertiti bust, feel free to Google it, you will see there's a lot of supermodels that just follow that very specific shape. This long, thin neck, pointed, smooth face, big, bright eyes. Definitely adds to the whole thing. Now, then again, that bust might be some kind of ideal artwork. So, take that one with a pinch. But still, even with that in mind, like, she's connected to him. So it's a famous name, and it pulses its way through pop culture and through time and through history, and its legacy lives on. And we can really see it in the works he does. So let's actually kick off with the numbers we have for him, and we'll compare him, contrast him to other people.
In summary, really, for Ramses,
yes,
we were saying that we want to kind of discuss these generals. What does history say about them versus what does our cold mathematical neural network say about them? This is one of the few cases, I think, where they agree pretty much exactly. Ramses II has average wins over expectation. I know, again, low sample size, but we're going to see that.
We're going to go with it. Yeah, we're going to go with it.
Wins over expectation 0.787. So that means the average battle, basically what would be 50-50 to another general, like he'd go in with a 20% chance and kind of win the same amount.
And win it, and win the same thing. Yeah. So to put it in perspective with the 0.787, now that's just a number that seems to be pulled out of thin air, but to put it in perspective, if that number was 0, that would mean in a 50-50 battle where I have a 50% chance of winning, you'd win 50% of the time. The higher that number is, the more impressive you are as a commander. And correspondingly as well, that number can be negative. So if I said it was -1.
-1 would mean that, like, it's a sure thing and somehow you messed it up. That's -1 would mean like you were going in with 10,000 people against one guy. Just some lad.
just some guy standing there in a white suit.
And somehow you just
threw it all away. What were you doing?
You hit the wrong button on the keyboard and you accidentally hit resign. Something went bizarrely wrong there.
Some kind of, it's like a heart defect has felled your opponent moments before the battle took place. Yeah, it's like, no. Yeah.
A +1 is the opposite. A +1 is that you're that lad, but then it turns out
you're liquid luck. Yeah. You're just like boom, you just go into any situation, you're like, that is it, don't worry, I'm here, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
So he scores a 0.787 on that scale.
So that's, again, like, small sample size.
Super impressive.
Possibly, it would definitely have gone down if we knew more about the rest.
True.
Either way, like, it's very impressive.
So the idea is that even based on what we have, he just seems to be a very impressive commander. That he is, like, showing up of, like, no, this person is, he's definitely, the word genius could be thrown around for this person, I suppose. For Ramses.
Yeah, he's probably going in, as we go through episodes, we'll probably see a few like real standout figures, and he's definitely the one for this one.
Yeah. Well, definitely, considering the data we have for Egypt, he is the standout of Egypt. Now, he's the standout of ancient Egypt. We will come across a few other commanders, we'll talk about them in a moment, but he is the standout in the sense that he is head and shoulders above just about everybody else around his time. He is the man of his generation.
Then I suppose getting into the other numbers, as well as giving basic wins over the expected number, the machine also gives expected values for casualties and commander losses.
So how is he for casualties? What is he like when he loses troops?
In this case, seems to be how he wins battles. You look through some generals and they seem to win through capturing commanders, kind of taking the king or taking the general and expecting the rest of the army to fall. He didn't do that. He's hanging around the 0 above or below expectation.
Okay.
He's getting no more or less than what you'd expect. But casualties suffered is a -0.15, so that's like 15% less per battle than you'd expect. Like he's not taking unnecessary losses. He's doing well.
Okay, so he's smart with his troops. He's smart with his numbers.
Then on the other side, casualties dealt over expectation is about 88% more than what you'd expect.
Jesus
Christ. He is taking out his opponents.
He's just smashing hard into them, and that's it. Like, I'm sorry, you're gone.
Yeah.
Good luck. If I'm supposed to kill one guy, we're killing 2. That's pretty impressive. So, like, he scored super well in the win expectation, and he's even higher in the casualties dealt. So, would we necessarily say, though, that would he fall into a category then of somebody who's like a bit of a massacre when it comes to, like, if you're battling him, you're gone? Or what would we expect for that?
Compared to other generals of his time and their capabilities, like just tactically, he just seemed to know how to win. It didn't matter. Army size didn't matter as much. He wasn't going to just try and go totally risky and try and take out a commander. He's just going to beat the other army on tactics alone.
So our rule of thumb for Ramses is he's going to have a good battle against you. He's not going to lose as many troops as you'd expect, but he's going to kill most of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
You're unlikely. Your best option is probably deserting if you're on the other side.
Well, that's
I suppose his highlight battle then as well of, I know the only two we have, but I suppose one that's even kind of noted by historians and one that you may want to look up yourself. Battle of Kadesh, considered to be the largest chariot battle ever fought. About 5,000 to 6,000 chariots in total between both sides. Again, he's just being the most Egypty pharaoh. There, he's living forever. He's hitting you with chariots.
How dare you be so stereotypically Egyptian?
he set the template. But Battle of Kadesh, anyway.
Yes.
According to the computer, he was given about a 22% chance to win that.
Jesus Christ!
Went out won it handily. If you look through the actual figures, he had about 20,000 men, of which 2,000 were chariots and everything.
Yes.
The enemy strength, the Hittites, anywhere between 23,000 to 50,000, opposing him with anywhere between 2,500 to almost 4,000 chariots. So
he was at least matched in chariots, if not outnumbered.
Oh, exceeded just totally outnumbered. Yeah, the computer also gives him. We were saying like his casualties dealt out above expectation were massive. In this one, it was 94% more than what you'd expect. Roughly. I mean, the numbers are spotty. This is one, again, we're talking about 1,274 BC, but...
This could also be a big victim of propaganda and inflation over time, where it's like, oh no, they didn't just beat that, they bet this, and they didn't just beat that, they bet this. But if you do look at a lot of particularly some of Ramses' battles, the Hittites might claim this was a draw, but when it comes back to him, he's like, nah, we won. That was kind of ours. It was in the bag. We did this one. So we do have to take some of these results with that. Maybe they won, maybe they didn't. Maybe it was a strategic win, maybe it was a tactical win. It's very hard to gauge it because very much history is written by the winners. And these people like to exaggerate their wins. We're going to get all into that when we come across people like Caesar.
Just the amount that they wrote down and the amount that Ramses got to put down with his own name stamped on it. If history is written by the winners, the amount written indicates they probably won this.
Yeah, they probably won it. We're probably not exaggerating too much. Where it's like, no, I'm gonna. Yeah, the Ramses seal of approval. Yeah. Jesus Christ, we should have that as some kind of just logo or quality mark. Like, boom, just some hieroglyphics you stick on. The Ramses seal of approval, brought to you by Ozymandias.
It's just fun to say Ozymandias, isn't it?
It is very fun to say Ozymandias. The Greeks got it right when they called him that. It's a very fun nickname. I'm going to give him that. So we'll move on from Ramses. Ramses the Great definitely is the great when it comes down to the data we have for him. We'll move on to some more culturally covered or recorded commanders. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Ptolemy. Now, for those of you who don't understand, you might have heard the word Ptolemy or Ptolemaic Egypt, but who he pretty much is he was a sub-commander of Alexander the Great. He was very likely a half-brother of Alexander, but there's also a chance that was just some propaganda that he threw out later in life. And he's like, no, actually, I'm a half-brother of his. My real dad is Philip II, but we can't really do too much on that. Now, when we look at Ptolemy, we got a lot of battles for wins. We have, 7 battles, 6 wins, 1 loss?
Yeah, but I feel like the 7 battles need an asterisk because... One thing that'll come up, and this is going to come up, I think, in a lot of episodes, people kind of riding Alexander's coattails. Now, you could argue Alexander was propped up by having good sub-commanders, or, argue that the sub-commanders were propped up by him, but many of these battles was him as the infantry sub-commander under Alexander. Certainly an important role, but this is bumping up his numbers, I would say.
Definitely. For some of them, even he was a sub-commander under Parmenion, who was a fantastic commander under Alexander as well. So it's kind of, you're surrounded by just brilliant generals and tacticians and commanders. They're all around you. It's a total, it's a total hub of just solid tactical and strategical commanders in there. And there is a phrase that comes to mind when we think of Ptolemy or Parmenion or any of these commanders, and it's that a rising tide raises all ships. It's like, if you're just around them, that's it. You're associated with them, you're tacked onto them. But so anyway, if we chat a little bit about Ptolemy, his big deal is after Alexander's death, the Macedonian Empire, which conquered most of the known world at the time, which pretty much wiped out the Persian Empire that was just before it. Ptolemy then decides that he claims Egypt as his own section. And I'm going to say, hands down, before anything else is done, Ptolemy claiming Egypt was pretty much the smart move of the whole thing, because you got access to the Nile, you have access to huge resources, just a rich, vibrant history, like a very good tax base, and pretty much an area that can grow so much food that the Romans will take over it eventually. Pretty good move by Ptolemy, just to go over there and take Egypt as a whole, because it is the place in the ancient world worth taking. There's a reason the pyramids there. There's a reason they have the resources and the expenditure to build that kind of stuff. It's just it's a very important tactical and strategic location. It is culturally so rich, it's just worth having. So Ptolemy eventually does establish a Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, and it becomes riddled historically with a lot of just bureaucratic nonsense. And I mean by that is there's so much taxes and charges and infrastructure. It's something definitely worth looking up. It's nightmarish. But I want to put a modern example. The Ptolemaic dynasty never bothers to actually learn Egyptian when they're governing.
They stay Greek, basically.
They stay Greek. They stay very Greek. Even to say that these people are Egyptian is off-putting, because they're not. They don't speak Egyptian. They don't deal with it. The Rosetta Stone comes from these kind of interactions where you have, a Greek person needing to translate Egyptian. It's just they don't absorb the culture. They stay entirely and do their own thing. They just do not become Egyptian. And it would be a modern day equivalent of the Windsors, which would be the royal family in England, just speaking German. They're like, well, we came from Germany. We're still there. We're whatever. Queen Victoria's German. This is it. We're just speaking German. Doesn't matter who we address. Doesn't matter where we're an ambassador for, who comes to visit. We're going full-blown German. And we're not going to change it. And that's it.
World wars be damned.
Yeah, actually, that's a great example. World wars be damned. They could have wars with the Greeks and they're like, we still ain't speaking Egyptian. We're sticking to what we do. But that does lead to some interesting kind of developments for the Ptolemy dynasty, because most of their troops will be Greek, and they will be Greek mercenaries, they will be Greek infantry, they will be people who move to Egypt, they will be people who grow up in Egypt who speak Greek, and they will fearfully not really train Egyptian people in Egypt with the fear of a rebellion and a revolt. They won't do it. Although they do use elephants, which is very fun.
Always fun. And slightly tricky for the database for the neural network to interpret, because there aren't too many examples of elephants being used. But
yeah, but when they're used, oh, you better believe. So Ptolemy in general he's very much I'm going to say Greek, but he's Macedonian. Now, the difference between the two, it's like saying someone from Ireland is from the British Isles. You'd be correct, but they'd be like, now you're pushing it a little bit, It's not. Don't
say it to people from northern Greece. You're just
don't say to people from don't say to the different people in Northern Ireland. It's like, no, leave it. Don't do it. Yeah. So very much he is Macedonian, and Macedonia is very much northern Greece, and it's an area that will be very heavily Hellenized, will be very heavily affected by Greek culture. But you could argue, and you probably rightfully so, that they are like a separate cultural identity. They're not really Greek, they're Macedonian. They're their own thing. And they will, very much in Alexander the Great's father's lifetime, which is Philip II, he will conquer Greece and then he will move towards Persia. Or he will start, but he's assassinated. That's a whole other kettle of fish, big old stories. But they are Macedonian. He is very much Ptolemy, in summary. He's a Macedonian commander. He's a Macedonian commander who settles in Egypt with some Macedonian ideas and has a couple of Macedonian children, and they have Macedonian children, and that keeps going all the way to Cleopatra, which is a Greek name. They are very much almost a colony in Egypt ruling it. Yeah, so let's look at Ptolemy actually and see what his figures are like. So very much riding on the tailcoats of Alexander by the looks of it, because most of his battles are with him. And what happens through that whole setup? He's going well, he's kicking ass, he's taking names.
Here we do have, unlike Ramses, here we have an example where the history machine thinks overrated. His average wins over expectations is 0.06. So that's like if you had him fight 20 50-50 battles, he'd win 11 of them. It's a little bit above better. It's not super amazing.
He's nothing spectacular. That's interesting.
You go through it battle by battle, and number one thing is what we said. He's riding Alexander's coattails. He's not, he's obviously a big part of it, but he's not the only guy making these wins happen. And also, as I said earlier, because it's Alexander, most of the really successful ones, they don't take chances. That's why they keep winning. Most of the wins that he has, like, he won, but it wasn't necessarily massively over expectation. Like, he was the favorite in almost all of these battles.
Cathal, we definitely could make the argument that, listen, it would only be a silly commander or a stupid commander.
Oh, exactly.
I'm going to take this battle if I'm going to lose it. It's a whole different ballpark.
Yeah.
It's if you can pick your fights, like, why pick one you're going to lose?
Exactly. I think the history machine really, it's rating their tactical ability more than is the strategic ability, because a good strategist just doesn't get themselves into these kind of messes.
So we can definitely say about him then, he's probably a great strategist, but maybe not a great tactician. Now, actually, the great strategist would make a lot of sense, considering he ended up taking Egypt, the most valuable kingdom of the time.
This fits into that type of narrative. Like, he set up a very successful dynasty, and he picked the right horse in terms of how they were going to carve up Alexander's empire.
A funny side note, in order to kind of validate his rule, he kidnapped the corpse of Alexander the Great when it was being returned to Macedon and had it mummified, and it was in Memphis. I was going to say Memphis, Tennessee. No. All those years later, he took it to Memphis in Egypt. So he used to kind of say, well, we have the body of Alexander, and it was used as like a little prize or that tiny little bit of verification to say, yep, I'm the ruler here. I'm the most significant one.
I love wacky historical pettiness like this.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what's that Silicid? You say you're the real... Oh, no, let me ask Alexander. No, he said I... No, he's right over there. And he says that I get Egypt. Deal with it. Like...
I control Egypt? No. Oh.
Just, you get those other ones like with Cromwell or a few others where it's like they dig them up after their death so that they can like
hang them again, do something or make a second point. It's like, no. Death is not ending this for you here. Like, you have more functions and purposes. We're not going to go too far with this. Oh, so yeah, he does seem to be, he's definitely shrewd, definitely strategic, but looking at the data, he's not too tactical. So I can see here in front of us, his win over expectation, as you said, was 0.06, but his casualties suffered over expectation is 0.11, which means he's losing slightly more men than he should.
Yeah, a little bit more. And I think where you get it, and this is something, again, comes from, I think, working with Alexander, the enemy commander's losses over expectation, that's probably the more dramatic number here, because most commanders, most battles, you don't have either commander getting taken. So most generals going through this, their commander captures, it ends up being roughly 0 or something similar. It doesn't very much. So having 14% more enemy commander captures.
We'll put it this way, when it hits the fan, the commanders hightail it and get out of there.
Yeah. So
a lot of the time.
I think this is a kind of a hallmark of Alexander's strategy where, like, in battles, he would just take the option of maybe, like, risking a few more men, but just going directly for the enemy king. And it was kind of all or nothing strategy. But when it worked, you ended the war.
That's definitely an Alexandrian kind of tactic. It's like, you know what? Screw this. It's all going to go sideways. It's time to go and just take the commander. And these people... and these sub-commanders fall into that category as well, which probably makes a lot of sense because they would have suffered very heavy casualties just trying to enable him to get that.
Yeah.
So they'd almost be support in the battlefield scenario where it's like, listen, we got Parmenion, we got Ptolemy, we have a few other people. It's like, we got to hold this ground, defend this area, keep everything in check while we let Alexander come in with the sledgehammer and just take out where he needs to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's not maybe the most conservative or efficient.
It's not the most significant data we should probably look at when we think of the casualties they did suffer. Now, here's an interesting one. Casualties dealt over the expectation. How much particularly has Ptolemy delivered?
That one was better. That was about 20% more than what you'd expect.
So he's probably losing men, but he's taking more than expected as well. So he's taking more than he's actually losing.
Yeah, so basically it supports that idea. Like, they're holding ground, they're doing that very successfully, but just the inherent strategy means that you're going to get a bit more casualties than you might like. But the idea being you can end the war with this battle because you're going to take out the leader. You lose a little more in this battle, but you lose less overall because you're fighting fewer battles, I suppose, the end concept.
Yeah. Now then we move on to something like the commander losses over expectation. Now I can see this number in front of me and it's a negative, which is a good sign, but it's approximately 0. It's very close to 0. It's tiny. So it's kind of didn't lose more than expected, but if you had to put a number, slightly less than average.
The occasional slip up, but overall...
overall, you're fine.
It's fine.
Totally fine.
Yeah. The main interesting thing, though, like, as we're going through all these numbers, he has 6 wins and only 1 loss. So why is he ranked as so average? As basically, we're saying every battle he entered, strategically sound, went in with the strong advantage. The problem with that is that when he finally lost, it really hurt his overall score because he should have won it. He should have won it. So the battle that he lost in this case, the one that is hurting his score overall, is the Battle of Salamis in 306 BC. And in this one, the naval battle, and I think, again, it could be a recurring theme as we go through this podcast, go through different episodes. Naval battles are just that bit less predictable, and they end up with a few more upsets. It's not going to be the last naval battle we mentioned in this episode, even. Yeah.
Well, a thing I got to say about naval battles, even looking at Ptolemy, he is a land like infantry commander. It's what he does. So even the idea, how about we get some infantry specialists and just throw them on a couple of ships and see, go for it, go naval, see what you do. So this is one that, although you do say this is one he still was expected to win, even with all of that behind him.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the neural network doesn't necessarily know if they're a specialist in one thing or the other. It kind of assumes how would a baseline general do in this situation. That gives you the expected result, and then how they actually did is...
Yeah, but even with that in mind, if we compared him to some bog standard admiral, he didn't perform as well.
No. In this battle, you had the other side coming in with about 180 warships. He had about 200 plus another 200 transports, so he had the numbers advantages. You go through the casualties, the other side, municipality studies, and they lost 20 warships, whereas Ptolemy and his other commander, Menelaus, I am not pronouncing
Menelaus, yeah. We're going to be terrible when it comes to pronunciations. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah.
They're going to be Greek, they're going to be Egyptian, we're going to come across Mongolian. We're we don't know what we're going to do here for some of these. But anyway, he did have his subcommander.
But yeah, 80 warships lost, 40 warships, 100 transports captured, and Menelaus, whose name I'm probably still not pronouncing correctly, he was taken as a prisoner of war. So it was a very, very bad result from a battle that he should have won. It basically wrecked his score for everything. Wrecked his score.
That's it. Yeah. So he had more ships. He had possibly better ships, but just it messed his score. And this was the slip up that wasn't expected.
Yeah. If that battle hadn't happened, not even if he had won it, if that hadn't happened, his average wins over expectation would have been about 0.2, about 3 to 4 times better than what it actually ended up being.
Now let's actually check out, we're going to move on to someone who's definitely more Egyptian on this one, and I think we'll move on to Necho II. This is somebody who is not really favoured by history. He lost a war to the Babylonians, he lost to Syria, and our database has 1 significant win and 2 significant losses. Pretty much, it's a little bit kinder, I think, in his history in terms of what happened, because he wasn't really expected to win those. Could you kind of go through it a bit?
Yeah, this is a good example of the counterpoint, and I think really I noticed him because, as I said, we have such little information, especially going this far back, but he's someone with 3 recorded battles in our database.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of the flip side, really, of what we saw with Ptolemy, where he only won 1 out of the 3. He lost 2 of them, and he's one that definitely, unlike Ramses, he suffered a lot from propaganda after his death, because he lost what is kind of now Syria. He lost a lot of territory for Egypt. After maybe a good start, he just kept messing up. But you go through the individual battles, and he just was not really expected to win. He performed basically about 2 expectation, really. His wins over expectation, it's minus 0.04. So maybe, I mentioned earlier, Ptolemy would, if you gave him 20 battles, 50-50, should win 11. Necho II should win 9. It's a very, very marginal thing.
It's actually very close. So if we could hypothetically put a Ptolemy into his situation with the same kind of troops, he'd probably perform the same.
Yeah, just very slightly better. Now, you go into casualties, it's kind of like Ptolemy, but worse. The casualties suffered almost 30% more than you'd expect. And the casualties dealt. Basically, he's bloody on both sides. It's just kind of reckless.
And it's nearly a 1-to-1, actually. They're both... The first one, the casualties suffered over expectation, which is the casualties you've taken more than the expected, is 0.276, and the ones delivered or dealt to the opponent is 0.292. So it's roughly the same. So he's bloody in dishing it out. So he can give it and take it.
Just kind of messy either way.
He's more bloody than would be expected.
It is kind of an interesting one, just seeing how, even though we're dealing with the cold mathematical formula with the neural network, with the history machine, it does kind of mirror what a lot of historians would say about him, which is just kind of, he was very eager to go out and try and conquer and try and go to war and everything, but just fell a bit flat. And really, you see those kind of reckless looking casualty numbers. It does kind of go into that whole thing where he was eager to get going, not necessarily ready for the job, and kind of underperformed really.
It just backfired on him. Yeah. So he's definitely somebody we can look at. He was probably a poor ruler. Probably was not great. Definitely very eager. An okay commander. In terms of the numbers and stuff dealt out, he at times can be as good as Ptolemy or close to it. He can deal well. But when you look at the overall, if this is a great example, if we wanted to compare the idea of strategy and tactics, that tactically he's probably similar to Ptolemy. However, Ptolemy is somebody who's much more strategic. Yeah. So if we look at the idea of a strategic Ptolemy is much much higher on that scale, which we don't really have recorded. This is much more a tactical database. They're both roughly even, but you can see what can go wrong when somebody is tactically minded but has not much strategic value.
Definitely seems like poor planning undid him. And also possibly worse propaganda than the others you've mentioned.
You don't rank up the... Well, I suppose you can, sometimes you can prop up the guy that won or lost, but it really depends. Propaganda can really kind of hit you hard. It's a strange brush to be tarred with. I do want to move on, and we'll talk about two more people, and one of them is part of the Ptolemy Dynasty, and the other one is 100% not Egyptian, but happened to fight kind of like in the name of Egypt near the tail end of our database. And those two people are a little bit of an infamous power couple, and we're looking at Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
Yeah, so I mean, we couldn't ignore these two going into the Egypt episode.
They're there. They're too important when you look at the overall, in terms of what happens to Egypt under the Roman Republic and then Empire. These people are absolutely central to it.
Yeah.
So start with Mark Antony. He was similar to Ptolemy, a sub-commander, but under another famous commander, and this would be Julius Caesar. So Mark Antony very much made his name in Gaul with a fair number of battles, did particularly well, was considered by Caesar actually a great sub-commander. I wouldn't say, like Ptolemy, probably not riding the tailcoats as much, but at the same time, it's hard not to ride the tailcoats of Caesar.
There are a lot of parallels with him and Ptolemy. The wins over expectation, it's a very, very close figure. His is 0.047, so again, just a little bit above average.
Yes.
The casualties dealt, almost identical. He's very, very slightly higher than Ptolemy. Ptolemy had 0.194, he has 0.198. So again, dealing out much, but much, much better casualties suffered. It's only 0.07% more than you'd expect. So
he's expecting about 7% more casualties than the average, but he was dealing out 20% more than would be expected.
Yeah. Whereas you look at Ptolemy, like he's done a little bit better on both fronts than Ptolemy. You know, again, the casualties a little more than he'd want, but it's not quite. You know, it's a lot closer to the average. One thing he does lack is that you don't have the same enemy commander captures or kills that Ptolemy had, and that's one that he falls down.
So here's a good question about Mark Antony. What is like his superstar role? What was his biggest win, his best result, his shining moment? Yeah,
one thing at least, for Mark Antony, he does have the same kind of riding coattails of someone else problem. But according to the History Machine, his biggest win, his most impressive win, it was one of the ones on his own terms where he was the main commander.
He was in charge himself. He was the main commander.
This one was the first Battle of Alexandria, where History Machine, it gave him a 1 in 4 chance to win. Very low odds. He had an army about one-third the size of the enemy, and it was continuously dropping due to desertions. He pulled out and won it. However, there was a second Battle of Alexandria later in the year, because the desertions kept going, and the other side just kind of went, you know what, like, let's have another go at this. I know we messed up the last one. I think we can take him now.
Yeah,
and that ended up being one of his losses. But yeah, that was a very impressive one. But then also, as with Ptolemy, like the ones that he won under Caesar, they were expected to win those ones. So his overall rating didn't go up massively. Yeah.
I think similar to our Alexander idea, or the idea of you don't really engage in a battle you don't think you can win. We look at Mark Antony, and particularly we look at Caesar, and Caesar was somebody who would pick his battles particularly well. Now there are cases, of course, when we come across Caesar where you'll see there are exceptions to that rule, but you would be hard pressed to find commanders in our database that don't at least try, or don't at least have a good chance of winning, unless it's like a big siege on their city and they don't have too many troops. Normally you try and bring an equal amount or a decent number of troops to a battle to make sure you can win. So Mark Antony has a lot of wins. We have him down for 5 wins and 3 losses. These are all significant wins. And
a bit of a mixed record, which actually does kind of fit I think the historical view of him really is like he's very significant in terms of history. You know, he was part of a Roman civil war. He was a lot kind of hung in the balance. But at the same time, he's not necessarily considered the best of the best general-wise. He had a few losses as well as a few good wins. And that seems to be supported here. Also in that Roman Civil War was Cleopatra.
Yes, let's talk about his better half. She has, funnily enough, in our database, 2 significant wins and 1 significant loss. She has had 2 wins as a co-commander with Caesar. So
commander/leader. It's arguable, how much influence she had directly in that, but, you know,
she might have just been there. But still, she gets credit. Well, you know what? We should give her as much significant credit as any of her ancestors who are riding tailcoats of Alexander or are like riding tailcoats of other powerful other commanders is like, I happen to be there as well. Hey, talk about me and give me some troops or give me a kingdom. I was a guy. I'm a guy like me. So,
but then of course another problem was, and again fitting in the historical narrative, she backed the wrong horse.
Yes,
and her loss was also Mark Antony's biggest loss. It was the Battle of Actium, and that drags down the score a lot. Going through the computer numbers for that battle. They were given about an 80% chance to win, roughly.
Now, I'm just going to talk a teeny bit about Cleopatra because I think, you know what, we're looking at her on the basis of a commander or like of a tactician, and she's not scoring well. But she's much more significant if we look at her historically as a politician, as maybe like a negotiator, as somebody who was really popular among Egyptians. Because remember how we mentioned earlier that a lot of these Ptolemaic dynasties never bothered to learn Egyptian? She was the first of that ruling class to go, you know what, I'm going to learn it.
Yeah.
And she became insanely popular with the people. So you can look at her as a much more shrewd diplomat or politician, or like definitely she lives on in pop culture. Ask somebody to name someone Egyptian, they're going to say Cleopatra, Nefertiti, and then maybe like Tutankhamun. But she is, I will say, name an Egyptian Cleopatra. That's your answer.
Yeah.
You're just going to get that.
I think the thing with her really is, we said there's this big loss, she backed the wrong horse, but the thing is, it's definitely arguable with the expansion of the Roman Empire. She maybe helped prolong Egypt by one more generation. If things had swung slightly differently in that battle, she could have kept it going another length of time again.
Well, you know what, Cathal? It's one more generation than you or I could have probably kept it by.
Yeah.
So we don't need to be too quick here throwing some stones going like,
oh no, I meant that as in it was kind of screwed regardless. She helped prolong it. Other people wouldn't have been able to. I'm not doing it. She kept it going and all very nearly managed to keep it going even longer still in what was kind of a losing battle.
I think we have her down here as her best win, like her biggest shining moment as a commander, as the Siege of Alexandria. Yeah. And the Siege of Alexandria, that would be 47 BC. And this would be considered a series of skirmishes that pretty much occurred between Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, and Ptolemy the 13th. Now, we do mention there's a lot of Ptolemies. These people are like papal names. So, long story short, talk a little bit of a side note about the Ptolemy dynasty. They're pretty much all named Ptolemy. It's like Ptolemy the first, the second, the third, because it just goes on and on and on. And because they're a little bit kind of, they feel a little bit Targaryen, a lot of them ended up marrying siblings and kind of, go with that old route. So Cleopatra was very briefly married to her brother. Don't think about it.
But this battle was significant because it led to her and the brother basically becoming co-rulers of
Egypt at the time. Yeah.
I mean, kind of as a Roman puppet, but still.
Yes.
She got into control basically through these series of battles.
So in fairness, she really did put it out of the bag. If you think a lot historically about Macedonian politics, there's a lot of backstabbing. And this definitely kind of leads to her idea of being a very shrewd political person. That she was able to pull this out of the bag, get a little bit of foreign influence, get herself in a co-ruler position and not have to worry about some kind of assassination or execution or, kind of being shoved away into a corner. She did come out on top of this. So as we said, we're judging her very harshly as a commander, which this is what the date is giving us. But like other significant people we might talk about here, as a political figure than a military one.
And actually, even as a commander, she doesn't come out too badly out of it. Wins over expectation about average. Her casualties are terrible. They're about 20% more, very bloody on both sides. Enemy commander losses over expectation is good. That's about a small sample size, but maybe taking one more than expected in those battles.
We'll actually quote a few of her numbers here. So the win over expectation is about 0%.
Yeah.
So
it's just
she's actually performing average, which is, as we said, unexpected. Like, it's average compared to everybody else. We look at all our commanders, she's coming out okay. The casualties suffered is about 20%, but that's because she had a very significant loss. That one really adds up to that. The casualties dealt out, as we mentioned, 0.33%, so she's actually just at the third. So she's quite bloody. Even actually, here's a good deal, she's actually more bloody than Mark Antony or Ptolemy.
Just very messy. And I think really, again, it is so much of this is coming down to the one battle that went badly wrong. I think all the numbers really prior to that, and again, probably because she was throwing herself in with the right people with Caesar and everything. She was getting very good results in the battles she had involvement in.
If she hadn't lost that battle, she'd have gone down very, very well. So her enemy commander losses over expectation is 0.447, which is quite higher than expected, which means if there are 2 battles, she's going to kill a commander in one of them.
Kill or capture, yeah.
It's pretty significant, though. It's much higher than anybody else.
Partially influenced by low number of total battles, but still, like...
Yes.
So I suppose, we mentioned anyway, both Mark Antony and Cleopatra, they had one battle that just wrecked their numbers and, wrecked their chances at winning the war as well, the civil war for Rome. That was the Battle of Actium. Their expected odds of winning, according to the History Machine, was about 80%. They didn't have superior numbers, but they had much, it was a naval battle. They had far better warships.
Now, I do know historically about this particular battle, they suffered very heavily from disease and desertion.
The thing that's generally recorded about it, and there's a lot of there seems to be a lot of he said, she said on this battle, but basically, Cleopatra, who had a big share of the forces, she ordered a retreat. And I wasn't sure if that was miscommunication, if it was panic, if it was just seeing an opportunity maybe that wasn't there, or just, at some point anyway, wires got crossed. Something happened, no one's sure why. She retreated, Mark Antony and his forces saw that, and it just the panic set in, it caused a mass rout, and then they just got destroyed from there.
That's when it goes.
And that led basically to both of them being out of the picture.
Both of them being destroyed, yeah.
That is the one that they probably should have won it, but, communication, it's important. It's important for all couples.
It is a key for a solid relationship, is decent communication, and they did not have it, and that's why it all fell apart, and that's why they're not in charge anymore. They have a serious love-hate relationship going on here.
If you're taking anything from this podcast, it's 1, Egypt is old, 2, Ramses II, remember that name, and 3, importance of communication in your relationship.
I mean, if you don't get it right, like you could lose something like the Battle of Actium, and there you go, you've ruined your reputation forever. 2,000 years later, you're going to have 2 lads just talking about how only mediocre you were.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So anyway, just to finish up, we're going to talk a little bit about the max ELO rating. So the ELO rating it's kind of based off a chess scoring system. Originally chess.
Used in tons of sports nowadays. It's based on your wins and losses, but takes into account how likely you were to win or lose.
You were expected to win,
yeah.
Yes. Now, this, unfortunately, will be hindered a little bit by the data we have, as in, for some of these commanders, we don't have much data. For some of them, we have quite a bit of data, but their losses are quite significant. But we can actually give you a bit of a ranking system for these commanders. And let's do a top 5 for the commanders we talked about. And ranking at number 5 is Necho II, who has scored 1507.
That was his peak rating, yeah.
He
had one battle initially, which he was kind of expected. Like the max jump with the current settings would be 32 rating points. Baseline's 1500. So maximum you could have after one battle would be 1532. He had 1507 after his one win, which...
So he was kind of expected to win?
It was more or less expected. It was solid, but nothing special. And then it all went downhill from there.
The next highest, now this is because he has 3 significant losses, is Mark Antony coming in at number 4.
Yeah.
And his score is 1519.
So here we see, he probably had enough wins that if they all came one after another, he would have had a very high rating. But I think the combination of the ones that he won were mostly ones expected to win, and also maybe he couldn't get a good streak going. Meant that it only reached 1519 in the end.
And that spectacular loss at the end, due to desertion, disease, and miscommunication, that really did him in, and it's brought it down. So ranking just above him, his better half, at 1525, Cleopatra. Initially,
with Caesar backing the right horse, those first couple of battles that she's listed as having some involvement in brought her rating up quite a bit, 1525 out of 2 battles, before obviously it plummeted with the final Battle of Actium.
And now, like a Miss Universe competition, I'm going to announce the winner. And drum roll for this one. Believe the hype. Ramses II, Ozymandias, trailblazing in here with 1550.
We mentioned that one of the issues is we don't have that many battles. So, you don't have that many data points really. So you can't see a massive variety in ELO. You're only going to have them get so high or so low before you run out of battles. Mm-hmm. But to see that much with only 2 battles...
Yes.
I have at hand the overall database and all the rulers from our 2,500 years of battles and everything. this is the highest rating with that few, with only 2 battles of anyone. It's just like those 2 battles should not have won either of them, and he just
let's put it in perspective. The maximum he could have scored with those battles, the maximum score. This is like a
1564
would have been 1564.
Yeah. And 1550, just below that.
Just below it. So he's off. He's off by only 14 in comparison. So he's like trailblazing. A 1564 would have been him alone taking on like the Persian million men at the hot gates.
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
Sorry. That twice. Yeah. That would have been a 1564. But he scores 1550, so believe the hype.
Yeah.
And then in second place, the runner-up in case Ramses II cannot perform his pharaoh duties is Ptolemy I.
Yeah. So this is a counterexample where he won the first 6 battles, but only got up to 1539 as his peak.
Just how well Ramses II brought it up there. So yeah, I suppose his name streaks through time. It punches through poetry, it lingers with us, and it lingers for good cause and good reason. So I suppose that finishes up and concludes our episode for Egypt. However, I think the next episode we'll probably start talking about the ancient Greeks, because we actually have a lot of data on Greek city-states.
I mean, as we said for this one, most of what we had for Egypt was Greek, basically. It was Ptolemaic Egypt. So, I think we may as well get into this before it overlaps with too many others, because it's going to overlap with a lot.
It will. So we're going to focus on some ancient Greeks, and we'll probably dig a little bit into the Spartans and the Athenians, who was better and why. So yeah, we'll look into the early Greek city-states, see where we'll go. I'm going to find this one rather exciting because I did record the database and we have so much information on Greek city-states. They're tiny areas, they're small kingdoms, but they just wrote things down. And that's why we got it, and that's why we know so many of them. And we're definitely going to punch through them, and I'm kind of looking forward to it.
Once again, communication's key.
Communication is key. So thanks very much for listening. I have been Niall, and my co-host and friend, Cathal. And that's all from us.